List Toolbox. Today we're going to be looking at initial analysis of non-literary texts. Perhaps you're quite confident when you're reading literature because you know the sort of things you need to look out for. You need to look for literary devices, elements of literature, themes, or historical contexts. However, when faced with a non-literary work, you become a little bit overwhelmed or confused. Because you want to know exactly what you have to do. The answer to this is Clapstone. Clapstone is a model to help you remember what you need to look out for when you analyse non-literary texts. Basically, it's a reminder of the things that you need to identify. But what exactly is Clapstone? Essentially, it's a mnemonic that stands for content, layout, audience, purpose, style, and tone. Let's look into these a little bit deeper. Well, content. Content asks us to consider exactly what is a text talking about. This might be the subject, the ideas, the themes, or the messages of a text. We can do this by asking ourselves some questions such as, what is a text about? What's the text message, main ideas and themes? Or how does the content affect other aspects of the text? This will be really useful in trying to understand the text and it's the way in which it works. Next is layout. Layout is a question of how. How is the text structured mainly? Here we'll be considering things such as appearance, structure, images, and genre or text type. So stuff such as maybe a photograph, fonts, colours, pull quotes, statistics. And with genre, we want to think, well, what is a text specifically? Is it a blog? Is it a poster? Is it an advertisement? Is it a brochure? Is it a pamphlet? Exactly what is it? And does it and how does it reflect that genre? So questions we can ask ourselves here are, what does the text look like? What's the text genre? And does the text challenge or adhere to genre conventions? Here, this requires us to think, does it follow other examples of that genre, or does it deviate from them in some way? Next, we have audience. The audience is obviously a question of who. Who is the target reader? Now, when we identify this, we want to be as specific as possible. So we can ask ourselves, who is the text intended for? What's the intended audience's age, gender, race, and socioeconomic background? And also we can ask ourselves, how does the intended audience affect other aspects of the text? Because of course, a text is aimed at a teenage high school student is going to be different than a text aimed at a middle-aged dentist, for example. Next, we have purpose. This is a question of why. Why was this text made? What's the reasons behind its creation, and what's the text's aims? Questions here would be, what is the text trying to achieve? We could consider if it's trying to inform, argue, persuade, explain, or entertain maybe, and we can think about how the purpose affects other aspects of the text. Of course, a text is trying to persuade you something is going to be made in a very different way to a text that's trying to entertain you. Next, we have style. Style is all about the choices. So how was the text put together by the author with their choices and their use of devices? So here you'll be thinking a lot about language. So you might say, what techniques have been used in order to help the author achieve their purpose? Are there any stylistic devices? Maybe these are literary devices or rhetorical devices or interesting uses of language. And finally, you might be thinking about how does the style affect other aspects of the text. And the last thing we need to remember is tone. Again, the tone is a question of how. This time it's how does the text portray attitudes towards something, and how does the text encourage us to feel? Here we can ask ourselves questions about treatment as well. How does the text treat the subject? Does it treat it in a way that's optimistic, pessimistic? Is it critical? Is it dismissive? Is it encouraging? How does it treat that subject matter? So questions over here to help us are, what is the author's attitude towards the subject of a text? How formal is the author being? What is the mood of a text? How does the author make the intended audience feel? And finally, how does the tone affect other aspects of the text? Once we consider all these aspects of Clapstone, the content, the layout, the audience, the purpose, the style, and tone, we'll have a good understanding of how that text was put together and how that text works and impacts people who engage with it. So let's have a little look at an example. Consider this poster over here. Let's follow Clapstone. The first thing, C, is content. So I might ask myself these questions again. Upon thinking about these questions, I might come to the conclusion that the content is about contains some themes, such as sexual harassment, which is obviously portrayed in bold writing at the top of the poster. It's about silencing women. There's this hand up. There's a cross in front of the hand. They don't have any identity here. We can talk about a message, which maybe might be to raise awareness and seek help, or even to speak up if you're a victim. At the bottom, there's contact numbers. And it seems to be addressing victims of sexual harassment directly. So that might be the content of a text. Moving on, L, we need to think about the layout. Questions that can help us with this are these. So considering layout, we might sort of think that there's not a lot of text. It's quite striking in this image, and the colours are might be associated to both danger but also to femininity as well. There's also statistics and contact information at the bottom. So these are all the sort of things that we can see. This is how it appears. We can see that it definitely follows genre conventions of a poster. Images are really important. There's not too much text. And quite importantly, there's the word stop down the side. That's very striking. It sort of reflects that of a stop sign with that you might see in traffic. This here is something that the audience is quite aware of, and we can see that there's an instruction there because of that. So here we thought about our layout. Next, we need to consider our audience. Well, who exactly is this aimed at? We have some questions here to help us with that, and we might come to this conclusion. Well, maybe it's aimed at women because of the colour scheme and the female characters involved. But also you can see it is aimed at a modern audience with the use of a hashtag, the Me Too movement. This is something that's a trend and used widely on social media, and so more modern, younger audiences would be aware of this. Next, we need to think about P, purpose. So we need to think about what's the text trying to achieve. We might come up with the idea that a text is trying to inform us. It's trying to raise awareness about sexual harassment, and we know this because there's statistics and facts all over the poster, and it's quite striking in its appearance. Next, after the purpose, we need to consider style. Now, style, you might want to think about the language here at the bottom. Making sexually suggested comments or jokes is the most common form of sexual harassment. If you experience or witness unwelcome behaviour, please visit our website or call us. So here with the style, we can see that the language is quite direct. There's direct language there. There's also a superlative with the word most. Yeah, so we're talking about addressing something that's quite extreme. There's a word choice there which is quite interesting, the unwelcome behaviour. The text could have easily been quite more extreme here, with something like brutal behaviour or vicious behaviour or disgusting behaviour. However, the unwelcome puts some power in the victim's hands, yeah, that they have a choice to bring something in, to welcome it or to not welcome it. So that's quite an interesting use of language there. And finally, there's sibilance. Sibilance is a repetitive S sound in language. And we can see that sexually, suggestive, comments, jokes, most, sexual, harassment. This creates like makes the act of harassment almost sinister. Predatory even. It reflects the sounds of a snake. And then finally, we need to think about the tone of the text, which we can do by asking these questions. Upon consideration, we might think that the tone is quite formal, but yet it's also very urgent and authoritative. It creates an alarmed mood, but is also helpful and sympathetic. We know this because it's quite alarming with its colours, with its fonts. It's very striking, but also it's quite sympathetic because there is it invites people to reach out, and there's a helpline at the bottom of the poster. So once we have all these sort of things, what do we do next? Well, we need to consider what task have we been given, and then we can be selective with the sort of information that we use. For example, maybe we want to comment on how the interplay between text and images are used to appeal to a target audience. Okay, so here we need to think about text. That would be style, obviously. We need to think about images. That would be our layout. A target audience would be our audience, and appeal might be our purpose. This here could also encourage us to think about tone and content, but we'd be more selective on what areas of our notes we prioritize based on this. So as you can see, the Clapstone model is there to help you draw attention to the different aspects of the text, but it's also there to help you organize your thinking and notes for when you come to address a task. Maybe it's a task that you've chosen, something that you want to explore in a non-literary work. Finally, I want to take a moment to think about how this fits in with the three-leveled analysis model for other aspects of analysis in English and language and literature. The first one, obviously, is identify small aspects. This is the effects of style and maybe layout here. You can ask yourself what choices are being made. Consider stylistic devices, particular use of language or rhetoric. And what are the effects of these? So as the author used a rhetorical question maybe, and what effect does that have? And how are the visual elements constructed here? What impact do they have upon the reader? Are they quite emotive? Are they quite ominous? Are they quite threatening? Or do they arouse like pity and sympathy? And how is it they do that? What's exactly being depicted there? At the second level, we might want to think about tone and mood or rhetorical appeal. Rhetorical appeal is about logos, ethos, and pathos, which you can learn about on this website also. So the questions you might want to think about here is what tone or mood is achieved through particular textual features from level 1, and is there a rhetorical appeal that's being used in order to persuade an audience? Finally, we can connect this to something bigger. From the Clapstone model, this would be the purpose, the audience, the content, or the genre. So after you've considered maybe language or visuals and how they create a tone, you might want to see how this achieves a purpose in the text. How is the author doing that? Or how is this sort of appealing to a specific target audience? How is it targeting in on the audience's beliefs, values, desires, or needs? You might also want to think about how this constructs part of the content, like the themes or messages. And finally, you want to think about how this challenges or follows a particular genre type. So these are sort of the way that we can structure our thinking when we approach this. So when we approach a non-literary text, there's some things I want you to remember. Initially, you can use the Clapstone model, which is a model to help you remember what you need to identify in a text, and this consists of content, layout, audience, purpose, style, and tone.